Why are so many young people suddenly so angry? Well, mostly it's economics. Teal Capital's Eric Weinstein recently got to the core of it. He said this, quote, essentially, a young breadwinner needs to be able to buy a reasonably priced home in a decent town with many opportunities and provide for a second parent to stay home raising young children. You want our parties to end this unraveling? Get them to agree that when a nation cannot provide sufficient opportunities for young folks to couple, become stakeholders, and tend to the raising of healthy kids, we have problems. We certainly do. And we recently talked to Brad Wilcox of the National Marriage Project about this. Brad, thank you for coming on. As I watch the kind of perennial popularity of socialism come back, people my age, almost 50, think socialism, really? You have to ask yourself, well, what's the appeal? What could possibly be the appeal of socialism? And then I see numbers like these, and I think, if we don't fix them, we're going to get socialism.
Yeah, well, Tucker, I think a lot of younger adults are concerned about things like health care, employment, debt, and they see the government as sort of a good place for them to go to seek greater security, given the broader economic context we're seeing today in America.
So I want to zero in on marriage, because I know that you follow that, you study that closely. So marriage is, among many other things, an indicator of and a cause of prosperity. Married people with kids tend to be more economically stable. What can we do to reverse the trend that's causing young people to delay or avoid marriage entirely?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that we can do. One thing we can do is get rid of the marriage penalties that face a lot of younger adults, particularly working class and poor adults, and things like Medicaid, the EITC, food stamps. I think we can also do more to think about things like doing more to subsidize working class wages. But I also think we have to sort of think about the cultural context that we're living in and think about ways that we can make marriage both more appealing in the pop culture, and to think also about ways that we can do more to spend time in person and less time online as well. Because it looks like online culture is playing actually a pretty big role in both the retreat from marriage and the retreat from fertility in the U.S.
I think all of us, married people, unmarried people, all of us have an interest in this, because married people with kids aren't joining Antifa and smashing store windows and calling for 95% tax rates and burning things down. They're just not. A country with a lot of unmarried young people is a volatile country. So why don't our policymakers take this seriously?
Well, I think a lot of people think of marriage as just a private issue, and that the government cannot and should not do anything about, marriage and fertility-related topics. And they don't kind of see how what happens in our families has a lot to do with what's happening, in our communities and in our country more generally. Exactly.
That's such an obvious point. Why isn't everybody saying that? Why do we ignore this as a cause of social volatility that's wrecking the country? Why does nobody say that?
Well, I think it's obviously, things related to divorce and single parenthood and cohabitation are very sensitive for a lot of us. I mean, we all know people have been in difficult situations, and so I think there's a reluctance to kind of engage on these issues. And yet the science is very clear. So we've seen work by Raj Chetty, for instance, at Harvard, that indicates one of the best predictors of mobility for poor kids in communities across the country is the share of two parents in a community. So
of course
these things really matter for the health of the American dream here in the U.S.
Thank you for saying that. Brad Wilcox, I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Tucker.
Last Friday, we told you about the chance to knock Washington court historian Bob Woodward off the top of the bestseller charts, and tonight we are happy to report that it worked. You did that. The New York Times has announced the best-selling books of the last week, and Ship of Fools displaced Woodward's book. It is now #1. Thank you for that. You have our heartfelt gratitude, not just for making the book #1, but for supporting this show so consistently from the day it began almost 2 years ago. We appreciate that, for real.